There are nights when the dark feels louder than the world ever did in daylight. Sometimes it happens the moment everything goes quiet. Sometimes it waits until you finally lie down and close your eyes. Sometimes it feels like the silence itself is staring at you, like it knows things about you that you've never said out loud, like it's been waiting patiently for the lights to turn off. I don't know when sleep stopped feeling safe. I don't remember the exact night. I just know that somewhere along the way, rest started to feel like surrender. Like if I loosened my grip for even a moment, something inside me would spill out and I wouldn't know how to gather it back. There's a kind of tiredness that doesn't come from doing too much. It comes from holding too much in, from swallowing words, from pretending strength when something inside you has been quietly shaking for a long time. You don't talk about that part, the part that feels alert even in the dark, the part that listens for danger even when nothing is happening, the part that replays old moments with a precision that hurts, the part that wonders why peace feels unfamiliar, like a language you never learned. There are thoughts that only show up at night. They don't knock, they don't announce themselves, they just sit beside you, heavy, patient, unavoidable. They ask questions you've been avoiding all day. They remind you of who you were before you learned how to hide. They point to the places where you compromised yourself just to survive. And somehow, lying there in the dark, all the noise of the world fades and the truth gets louder. You don't need to explain this feeling, you already know it. It's the feeling of being awake inside a body that wants rest. The feeling of being tired in ways sleep doesn't fix. The feeling of realizing that some battles aren't fought in daylight and they don't leave visible marks. There are wounds that don't bleed. They just ache when everything slows down. They ache when you're no longer distracted. They ache when there's no one watching and you don't have to perform okayness anymore. Maybe that's why the night feels like a battleground. Not because something is attacking you from the outside, but because everything you've buried finally has space to breathe. The fears you never named, the anger you never released, the grief you postponed because life didn't give you permission to fall apart, the moments you replay, wondering if you failed yourself by staying quiet. You lie there staring into the dark and your chest feels tight, not from panic exactly, more like anticipation. Like something unresolved is hovering, waiting for your guard to drop. It's strange how strong you look during the day, how capable, how composed, how convincing. And then night comes and the mask loosens and the truth slips through the cracks. You start thinking about who you thought you would be by now. You start remembering promises you made to yourself that quietly expired. You start feeling the weight of carrying expectations that were never really yours, but somehow became your responsibility. There's a quiet shame in realizing how often you've abandoned yourself to keep the peace, how often you chose silence instead of honesty, how often you told yourself it wasn't that bad even when it was. No one taught you how to protect your inner world. They just taught you how to function, how to endure, how to keep going. So you did. Even when it cost you pieces of yourself, even when it made your nights restless and your dreams fragmented, and lying there half awake, half lost, you feel that familiar tension in your body, the clenched jaw, the shallow breath, the sense that you're bracing for something, even though nothing is happening. It's not danger you're afraid of, it's memory, it's truth, it's the possibility that if you stop moving, you'll have to feel everything you've been outrunning. There's a kind of courage in staying awake with yourself in the dark. Not the loud kind. The quiet kind that no one applauds. The kind that looks like breathing through discomfort. Like letting the thoughts come without pushing them away. Like admitting, even silently, that some parts of you are tired of being strong. You don't need to name the fear for it to be real. You feel it in the way your body doesn't fully relax. In the way your mind scans for threats that no longer exist. In the way you struggle to trust stillness. Somewhere deep inside there's a part of you that learned long ago that night was not a time to let your guard down. That vulnerability came with consequences. That safety was temporary. So even now, even when the room is quiet and the world has gone to sleep, that part stays awake, watching, listening, protecting. It doesn't know how to rest. It only knows how to survive, and maybe that's what hurts the most. Realizing that the exhaustion isn't weakness, it's evidence. Evidence of how long you've been carrying things alone. There are words you never said because you didn't know how they would land. There are feelings you buried because they felt inconvenient. There are truths you swallowed because you were afraid of what they might change. Night brings them all back, not to punish you, but because this is the only time they're allowed to exist. In the dark, you don't have to perform. You don't have to explain. You don't have to be impressive. You can just be honest. Even if that honesty is messy, even if it's painful, even if it comes out as silence and tears you don't fully understand. There's something sacred about that moment. Not in a dramatic way, in a fragile way. The moment when you stop fighting the fact that you're tired, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually, existentially. The moment when you realize that rest isn't just about sleep. It's about feeling safe enough to let go. And maybe you're not there yet. Maybe your body still flinches at the idea. Maybe your mind still believes that vigilance is the price of survival. That's okay. There's no rush here. No deadline, no expectation. Just the quiet awareness that you are more than the battles you fight at night. More than the thoughts that haunt you in the dark. More than the fear that keeps you alert when you want to rest. You are also the one who made it through days that felt impossible. The one who adapted when things fell apart. The one who learned how to keep going without losing their humanity completely. Even if it feels like you lost parts of yourself along the way. Even if you're not sure who you are anymore. Identity doesn't disappear. It goes quiet. It waits. It waits for moments like this. Moments when the world stops asking things from you. Moments when you can finally hear your own heartbeat. Moments when the truth rises without interruption. You don't have to fix anything tonight. You don't have to understand everything. You don't have to win the battle. Sometimes the most honest thing you can do is admit that you're tired of fighting, that you're tired of pretending, that you're tired of carrying pain in silence. And in that admission, something softens, not all at once, just enough to breathe. The night doesn't need you to be fearless. It just needs you to be real, to let the thoughts come and go, to let the feelings move through you without turning them into enemies, to trust that you are allowed to exist without armor, even if only for a moment. There's a quiet strength in staying with yourself through the night, in not abandoning yourself when things get uncomfortable, in choosing presence over numbness, and even if sleep doesn't come easily, even if the darkness still feels heavy, even if tomorrow feels uncertain, you are here, breathing, listening, surviving in ways that don't always look heroic, but are deeply human. The night will pass. It always does. Not because everything gets resolved, but because you are still here to witness the morning. And somewhere between wakefulness and rest, between fear and truth, between exhaustion and hope, something inside you remembers how to be gentle again. Not loud, not dramatic, just gentle. Enough to carry you through this night. The night has a way of peeling things back without asking permission. When the world finally goes quiet, when the noise and movement and pretending settle down, something inside you wakes up. It's not loud, it doesn't shout. It just sits there, present, undeniable, waiting for you to notice. During the day, you manage. You keep yourself busy. You keep your face composed. You move from one moment to the next without stopping long enough to feel the weight of what you're carrying. But the night doesn't let you outrun yourself. The night closes the distance between who you appear to be and what you actually feel. There are thoughts that behave during daylight. They stay tucked away, polite, almost obedient. Then the lights go out and they stretch their legs. They remind you of conversations that never happened, of words you swallowed, of moments where you needed yourself and didn't show up. It's uncomfortable how clear everything becomes in the dark. Not dramatic clarity, quiet clarity. The kind that doesn't accuse you but doesn't comfort you either. It just shows you what is. You lie there and your body remembers things your mouth never said. Tightness in the chest, a heaviness behind the eyes, a restlessness that doesn't have a name. It's strange how pain can be so specific and so vague at the same time. You know it's there, you feel it fully, but explaining it feels impossible, so you don't. You just let it exist with you, breathing in the same space, sharing the same silence. The night doesn't create these battles. It reveals them. It turns down the volume of the outside world so you can finally hear the inner one. The fears you keep under control all day start whispering, not about monsters or disasters, but about truth, about whether you're living honestly, about how tired you really are, about the cost of holding yourself together when no one notices the effort it takes. There's a loneliness that only appears when you're alone with yourself. Not the loneliness of missing someone else, but the loneliness of realizing how long you've been oceanally distant from your own inner life. You've been surviving efficiently, functioning well, doing what needs to be done. And somewhere in that efficiency, you stop listening. Night brings your attention back, not gently, but faithfully. You start remembering the version of yourself that felt more open, less guarded. The one who trusted easily before learning how fragile things can be. You don't miss that person in a nostalgic way. You miss them in a quiet, aching way, like realizing you've been speaking a second language for years and forgot your first one. The night makes that absence noticeable. Fear feels different after midnight. It's not sharp. It's not panicked. It's slow and heavy, like a fog that settles in your chest. Fear of being seen too clearly. Fear of naming what hurts. Fear of what might change if you finally admit the truth to yourself. During the day, fear hides behind busyness. At night, it stands on its own. And still, there's something honest about this hour, something unfiltered. You're not performing for anyone. You're not managing impressions. You're just here, breathing, thinking, feeling. Even the thoughts that scare you feel more real than the distractions you lean on during the day. There's a strange intimacy in that. Like sitting across from yourself in a room with no mirrors and no exits. The night teaches you that strength doesn't always look like confidence. Sometimes it looks like staying present when you want to disappear. It looks like letting the ache exist without numbing it. Sometimes it's just not turning away from yourself, even when what you see feels unfinished and fragile. You begin to understand that these quiet battles aren't signs of failure. They're signs of depth. They mean you're aware enough to feel the tension between who you are and who you're becoming. They mean you haven't gone numb. They mean something inside you still cares enough to speak when everything else goes silent. There's no audience for this moment, no applause, no validation, just you and the truth that shows up when it's dark. And maybe that's why it matters, because it's real, because it's unedited, because it belongs only to you. The night doesn't ask you to solve anything. It doesn't demand answers. It simply invites honesty. It holds space for the parts of you that don't get daylight, the doubts, the regrets, the hopes you're afraid to say out loud. And even though it can feel heavy, there's relief in not having to hide from yourself for a few hours as you lie there listening to your own breath. You realize that these nightly battles are not enemies to defeat. They are messages, signals from the parts of you that want acknowledgement, not suppression. They surface when the world goes quiet because that's the only time they can be heard. There is a kind of tiredness that doesn't show on your face. No matter how carefully someone looks at you, it doesn't announce itself with yawns or heavy eyelids. It's deeper than the body. It settles into your chest, your thoughts, the way you move through the day on autopilot. You wake up and already feel spent. Not because the day ahead is demanding, but because the weight you carried yesterday never really came off. You tell yourself it's normal. You tell yourself everyone feels like this. But somewhere inside, you know this exhaustion has a story. You've learned how to keep going even when you're empty. You learned early that stopping wasn't always an option. So you adapted. You found ways to function while parts of you quietly ran on fumes. You smiled when you needed to. You showed up when you had nothing left to give. You became reliable, strong, composed, and people saw that version of you and assumed you were fine. They didn't see the effort behind it. They didn't feel the constant inner tension it took to hold yourself together. This kind of tiredness comes from holding emotions that were never given space to land, from swallowing disappointment because expressing it felt risky, from carrying grief silently because there was no room for it, from being the one who stays calm while everything inside feels anything but. Every time you told yourself it wasn't the right moment to feel, something stayed awake inside you waiting for its turn. You don't collapse. You don't fall apart. That's what makes it invisible. Instead, you endure. You push through days that blur together. You measure your life by how well you can manage, not by how deeply you feel. And slowly, almost without noticing, survival becomes your default setting. Rest feels unfamiliar. Stillness feels unsafe. When things finally slow down, your body doesn't know what to do with the quiet. This exhaustion is proof of how long you've been strong in silence. It's the residue of battles you never spoke about, the emotional calculations you made every day, deciding what to say and what to swallow, deciding which parts of yourself were acceptable and which needed to be hidden. That constant self-monitoring drains something vital, not all at once, gradually, patiently. Until one day you realize you don't remember the last time you felt truly light. You might blame yourself for this tiredness. You might think you're weak or unmotivated or broken in some subtle way. But this exhaustion didn't come from laziness. It came from effort, from care, from staying when leaving felt easier, from loving when it cost you, from carrying responsibility that didn't belong entirely to you. Your body remembers all of it, even if your mind tried to move on. There are moments when you catch yourself staring into space, not thinking of anything specific, just needing a pause. Moments when even simple decisions feel heavy. Moments when your patience runs thin, not because you're angry, but because you're depleted. You keep telling yourself you'll rest later, when things calm down, when life allows it. But life rarely announces when it's safe to stop. This key, ND of fatigue, doesn't ask for sleep. It asks for acknowledgement. It asks to be seen as the evidence it is. Evidence of endurance, evidence of emotional labor, evidence of a nervous system that stayed alert for too long. You've been bracing for impact in a world that never really let you relax. And now your body is asking for something different, even if you don't yet know how to give it. You've grown used to carrying this weight, so much so that imagining life without it feels strange. Who would you be if you weren't constantly managing something? If you weren't holding yourself together? There's a quiet fear beneath the exhaustion. Fear that if you stop, everything you've been keeping in place might come undone. So you keep moving. You keep proving your strength to a world that rarely asks how much it costs you. And yet, even in this tiredness, there's something honest, something human. This exhaustion tells the truth about your capacity to feel deeply and stay present in difficult spaces. It tells the story of someone who didn't shut down completely, even when it would have been easier. Someone who stayed engaged with life, even while quietly burning through their reserves. You don't need to justify this fatigue. You don't need to compare it to anyone else's struggle. It exists because of what you've lived through, not because of a failure to cope. It's a signal, not a flaw. A sign that you've been giving from a place that needed care itself. And even if you're not ready to change anything yet, noticing that truth matters. There are moments when you look back and realize the damage didn't come from what you lost, but from what you agreed to ignore. The slow erosion didn't happen in one dramatic choice. It happened quietly, in small moments when you told yourself it was easier to stay quiet, easier to adapt, easier to be agreeable than to be honest. At the time, it felt like maturity, like strength, like survival. Only later do you feel the weight of what it cost you. You didn't betray yourself all at once. You did it in fragments. You learned which reactions were welcome and which were inconvenient. You learned when your truth made the room uncomfortable. So you adjusted. You softened your edges. You trimmed parts of yourself down to something more acceptable. Each compromise felt minor, almost reasonable. But your body was paying attention, even when your mind wasn't. That's how the tension started. Not as anxiety, not as fear, but as a low-level alertness you couldn't explain. A sense that you needed to stay watchful, careful, prepared when you silence your own needs often enough. Something inside you steps in to keep you safe. It doesn't trust ease. It doesn't trust openness. It learned that comfort can be taken away, that honesty can have consequences. So you became skilled at reading the room, at anticipating reactions, at adjusting yourself before anyone else had to ask. This vigilance felt like intelligence, like emotional awareness. But it came with a cost. You stopped checking in with yourself because you were too busy checking on everyone else. You measured safety by how little trouble you caused. The fear that lives in you now didn't come from nowhere. It was built moment by moment as you learned to override your instincts, to doubt your feelings, to question your right to take up space. Every time you chose peace over truth, your inner world learned that authenticity was dangerous, so it stayed guarded. There's a quiet grief in realizing how often you chose endurance over honesty. How many times you smiled while feeling unseen? How many times you told yourself it didn't matter when it did? That grief doesn't shout. It sits, it waits. It shows up as restlessness, as irritability, as a constant sense that you're bracing for something, even in safe spaces. You might wonder why you can't fully relax now, why your body stays tense, even when your mind knows you're okay, why stillness feels uncomfortable. This is the residue of self-betrayal. Not the dramatic kind, but the daily kind. The kind that teaches your nervous system that safety is conditional, that love requires adaptation, that belonging means silence. You didn't do this because you were weak. You did it because you were trying to survive in an environment that didn't make room for your full self. You did what you had to do, and it worked in a way. You stayed connected, you stayed included, but the part of you that needed to be seen learned how to hide instead. Now that part doesn't trust easily. It watches, it waits, it questions intentions. It keeps you alert even when nothing is wrong. It's not trying to sabotage you. It's trying to protect the version of you that got hurt when you ignored your own truth. There's an ache that comes with this realization. An ache for the moments you didn't defend yourself, for the words you swallowed, for the boundaries you didn't know how to name. It's tempting to judge yourself for those choices, to wish you had been braver. But you were doing the best you could with what you knew then. Still, the inner conflict remains. The part of you that wants peace and connection is constantly negotiating with the part that wants honesty and freedom. That tension is exhausting. It keeps you in a state of internal alertness, always scanning for the right response, the safest version of yourself to present. You may not talk about this fear. You may not even recognize it as fear. It feels more like caution, like realism, like wisdom earned through experience, but beneath it is a longing to stop performing, to stop editing yourself, to stop living as a compromise. This conflict isn't a flaw in your character. It's a signal, a sign that something inside you wants alignment, wants integrity, wants the relief that comes from no longer being split between who you are and who you think you need to be. Even noticing this tension is a form of honesty. Even feeling the discomfort means you haven't gone numb to yourself. It means there is still a part of you that remembers what it felt like to be whole. The darkness isn't as empty as it looks. When the lights go off and the room settles, it feels like nothing is happening, but something always is. The quiet becomes reflective, almost observant, as if it's watching you the same way you're trying not to look at yourself. You might have spent years thinking of the dark as something to get through, something to distract yourself from, something to fill with noise so you don't have to hear what's underneath. But the darkness isn't there to threaten you. It's there to show you what's been waiting. There are parts of you that only exist in silence. They don't compete well with noise or urgency. They don't interrupt or demand attention. They just withdraw when things get loud and wait patiently for stillness. In the dark, those parts step closer, not aggressively, carefully, like they're unsure whether you're ready to see them. You may notice memories surfacing without warning. Not dramatic scenes, just small moments. A look you didn't understand at the time. A decision that felt necessary but heavy. A version of yourself you barely recognize anymore. These memories aren't trying to hurt you. They're trying to be acknowledged. They're mirrors, not weapons. You've probably told yourself that you've changed, that you're not that person anymore. And in some ways that's true. You've adapted, you've learned, you've built armor. But identity doesn't vanish when it's neglected. It goes quiet. It waits in the background, storing fragments of who you were before the world taught you how to be careful. The dark has no interest in the roles you play during the day. It doesn't care how functional you are, how composed you appear, how well you manage. It strips all of that away without effort. What's left is not weakness, it's essence. The parts of you that never learned how to pretend. You might feel uneasy sitting with that reflection. It can be uncomfortable to realize how much of yourself you've set aside just to keep moving. There's a subtle grief in seeing those forgotten parts again, especially when you realize they're not angry with you, they're just tired of being ignored. The darkness holds these reflections without judgment. It doesn't rush you to fix anything. It doesn't ask you to explain yourself. It simply shows you what's there. The longings you buried because they felt impractical. The sensitivities you hid because they were misunderstood. The dreams you quieted because they didn't fit the life you were building. This mirror doesn't distort. It doesn't exaggerate. It reveals. And what it reveals is often gentler than you expect. You may see that the parts of you you thought were lost are still intact. Worn, maybe quieter, more cautious, but still present, still capable of recognition. There's a reason this reflection feels intense at night. Daylight is full of distractions that keep you from noticing what's missing. The dark removes those distractions. It gives your inner world space to surface. That can feel overwhelming at first, like too much truth arriving all at once. But it's not more than you can hold. You've been carrying it already, just without looking at it directly. You don't need to confront everything the darkness shows you. You don't need to reconcile every memory or reclaim every forgotten part immediately. Sometimes simply seeing is enough. Simply acknowledging that these parts exist can soften something inside you. The tension eases slightly when you stop resisting the reflection. The darkness isn't asking you to become someone else. It's reminding you of who you've been all along. Not the version shaped entirely by expectations, but the one shaped by feeling, by curiosity, by instinct. The one who responded to the world before learning how dangerous honesty could feel. There's a quiet dignity in letting yourself be seen by this mirror, even if only internally. In admitting that your identity is layered, complex, unfinished. In allowing the dark to hold those layers without demanding clarity or resolution. You may notice that when you stop fighting the reflection, the darkness feels less heavy. Not because it changes, but because your relationship to it does. It becomes less of a void and more of a container. A place where all the unspoken parts of you can exist without explanation. This is not a confrontation. It's a meeting. A moment of recognition between who you are now and who you've carried with you all this time. The dark doesn't erase you. It remembers you. And in that remembering, something inside you feels less fragmented, less alone, even if nothing else changes yet. There's a moment that doesn't get talked about much. It happens when the noise finally fades and you realize you don't have the energy to keep pushing against yourself. Not the world, yourself. The constant inner resistance, the quiet pressure to be okay, to be composed, to have some kind of control over what you're feeling. In that moment, the idea of winning or overcoming doesn't even make sense anymore. What you want is rest, not sleep. Rest from the struggle of holding everything together. You've been taught to think of healing as progress, as movement, as fixing what's broken. But there are nights when none of that feels possible. Nights when the most honest thing you can do is stay where you are and breathe through the discomfort. When distraction feels like another form of abandonment. When numbing out feels heavier than the pain itself. Presence isn't dramatic. It doesn't come with clarity or relief right away. It often feels like sitting in a room with feelings you'd rather avoid, letting them exist without labeling them or pushing them somewhere else. It feels slow, unproductive, almost pointless. And yet, something shifts when you stop trying to escape your own inner weather. There's a fear that if you stop I think everything will collapse. That the sadness will swallow you, that the anxiety will take over, that you'll get stuck. But what often happens is quieter than that. The emotions don't explode, they move, they change shape, they soften slightly when they're no longer treated as threats. Staying present means noticing the way your body holds tension, the shallow breath, the tight shoulders, the clenched jaw, not to correct it, just to notice, to acknowledge that your body has been working hard to protect you, that it learned these patterns for a reason. There's a strange relief in that recognition, a softening that comes from understanding rather than force. You don't have to make sense of everything you feel. Some emotions don't want analysis, they want company. They want to be sat with, not solved. When you allow yourself to stay, even when it's uncomfortable, you offer yourself something rare. You offer yourself presence without conditions. This kind of staying can feel like doing nothing. But it's not nothing. It's choosing not to abandon yourself in the moment you need yourself most. It's choosing to listen instead of distract, to feel instead of perform, to exist without armor, even if only briefly. There's vulnerability in that. A rawness that doesn't feel strong or admirable. It feels exposed, tender, real. You might feel the urge to toughen up, to snap out of it, to move on. But staying doesn't mean indulging the pain. It means letting it pass through without turning it into an identity. Healing in these moments isn't about feeling better. It's about feeling honestly, about allowing the full range of your experience to be there without judgment. That honesty builds something subtle but important. Trust. Trust that you can be with yourself even when things aren't resolved. You begin to realize that the battle was never with the feelings themselves. It was with your resistance to them. The energy spent pushing them away, denying them, managing them. When that resistance eases even slightly, the inner landscape changes. There's more space, more breath, more room to exist. This doesn't mean everything suddenly makes sense. It doesn't mean the pain disappears. It means you're no longer at war with your own inner life. And that shift matters more than any dramatic breakthrough. There's a quiet courage in staying, in not demanding immediate relief, in trusting that presence itself has value, even when it feels uncomfortable, even when it feels like you're not moving forward. You don't need to arrive anywhere tonight. You don't need to resolve the past or plan the future. You just need to be here in this moment with what is. That simple act of presence, repeated over our time, changes the relationship you have with yourself. Not by force, not by victory, but by familiarity. By learning that you can sit with your own truth without being consumed by it. By discovering that you are not fragile for needing rest from the fight. By realizing that staying present is not giving up. It's coming home to yourself in the quiet, unguarded spaces where healing actually begins.